The shots are very slow, very simple, beautifully put together. I mean, some beautiful framing, but you can concentrate on the dialogue without being too swamped by the cutting process and the fast action. And
today we're going to talk about the movie A Matter of Life and Death, known in the United States as Stairway to Heaven.
Yeah, a film with two titles. I think initially because they felt the American audience wouldn't take kindly to the word death in a film. More so, obviously, right at the end of World War II. So this is a British film. A brief synopsis. It's about a bomber pilot who is coming back from a mission over Europe. His aircraft has been severely damaged. Some of his crew are dead. And he is in radio contact with a base in the UK, trying to get back home. He's got a couple of problems. He has no parachute. His aircraft is severely damaged, and he's going to have to bail out. But in the meantime, he contacts the radio operator and starts this conversation. And as a result of this conversation, there's a kind of a very brief relationship builds up between a young lady, a young American lady, and himself, because of this radio contact they have, and her realizing that this pilot is going to jump from a burning plane with no parachute. So she's talking to him in his final moments of life.
Goodbye, June.
Hello, G for George. Hello, G George. Hello, G George.
And this obviously happens, but what happens when he jumps out of the plane? He falls through fog, and somebody in the afterlife fails to capture him, fails to pick him up, fails to sort of take him to heaven, the afterlife, this alternative world. He falls to earth. He lives. He's washed up on a beach, and then he meets this American lady who he'd spoken to just a few hours earlier.
How did you get here? I'm glad you're safe. What did you do? What happened?
Don't know. I just don't know.
And this starts this relationship, but it also starts a fight between himself and the alternative world where they want him back. He should have died. He should have died. He should be up there in heaven, this alternative world. And it's this fight between the world he is in, his new love affair, and the alternative world. And so it's a bit of that's the brief synopsis, and it's about this kind of court case which eventually takes place. So that's a kind of a very simple look at what this film is all about. It's a film which initially you think is quite simple, but actually there are quite a lot of layers. There's little, not substratus, but there's lots of little pieces of information and visual ideas and verbal ideas which come in. The film is probably about prejudice, and you will see that in the court case. You will see that in how that develops. I think in some respects it's also about mental health as well, because there is this thought, well, he's kind of diagnosed by a doctor that he's suffered an injury, and that's giving him issues, which is where his illusions are taking place. So I think there's a little bit of dealing with mental health, because obviously at the end of the war, there would have been a lot of service personnel, a lot of servicemen coming back, having been through some pretty severe situations, having experienced things which nobody should really go through. So, and I think, there are several strata of storylines or ideas, or just things which are just being put out there to say to the audience, think about this, without going into immense depth. But I think at its time, it was probably quite a revolutionary film, dealing with the idea of prejudice and dealing with a little bit about mental health and about some of the service personnel who would have been coming back having seen some pretty unpleasant things.
Yeah, I mean, I watched it for the first time last week. I had never seen it before, even though it's being a very, I think, very popular and very famous film. But it was the first time that I watched it. And I think watching it the first time, it was hard for me to know, okay, was his hallucinations, were they real? Or was it like a figment of the brain injury that he had suffered? I guess 2 years before he might have got a concussion. And then did the people around him, June and the doctor, did they believe him? Because sometimes they would say, they would talk about the brain injury, but then they would say, we really need to help him win this case, we need to meet this person, this conductor that was supposed to grab him and bring him to this other world, and we need to help him win this case. So there was like, was this really happening or was it not? And it reminded me, I actually talked to my father about it, who just watched the movie last night. My father's 73 and never seen the movie either. And we had kind of, there was a part at the end where I said, well, maybe it really all did happen, because there's this book that the conductor takes or borrows that gets thrown back to him, thrown back down the staircase, right? And thrown back and ends up in the bag. So that was like kind of this whole thing that I see in other movies, like Miracle on 34th Street, which is all about like whether or not Santa Claus is real. And in the end, they're at this house and there is Santa Claus's cane. So is that alliteration that they stuck in there to say, here's your faith that Santa Claus is real. Here's your proof that he really did have this whole, like, you know, travel back and forth to this world. Just that was something that I kind of was like, was that something that really happened? But I do see your point of the whole like mental health and the soldiers coming back and stuff like that. And I think the prejudice between like the person that is actually prosecuting him was the first person in the story, was the first person that was shot by the British in the American Revolutionary War, and was still stuck in this whole like anti-British thing with where we had the war, but wasn't like in this whole thing where now we're allies and we're fighting together in the World War II, where we're friends, we're allies, but he's stuck in this like I hate every American kind of thing.
Well, yeah, I mean, it's this idea that you become prejudiced, that you take a nation or a people or a color or a creed, whatever it might be, and you apply your very narrow viewpoint that everybody is like that, and you don't look at people as people, because you know everybody, we might be from different countries, Britain, America, we might have different colored skin, we might have different religions, but actually most people are, you know, we're all the same. And this film sort of looks at these prejudices of this the first American to be killed by the British in the War of Independence, and his inability to look at people as people. And he just looks at people, he just looks at a nation and he just believes that they're all identical or all the same. He's tarring them all with the same brush. He's tarring, you know, the whole of Britain with this same brush. He's not looking at these people as individuals and accepting them for what they are. So, he's I think initially for me, he's a great character. I mean, the actor who plays him, whose name I can't remember, but he's been in several of Powell and Pressburg's films. He's a great actor, very theatrical though. I felt that about the film at times. It's very theatrical. It's almost like you're watching a piece of theatre which has been filmed. It's got a very lovely look to it. I mean, I don't know whether I've said this, but obviously this film moved between black and white and colour. So Earth is in colour and the other world, heaven, whatever you want to call it, is in black and white. And this change from one to the other was revolutionary in its time, partially because colour film was incredibly new. It was incredibly scarce at the end of World War II. I mean, you know, black and white was fairly easy to get, but colour was incredibly difficult to get. And the thing I like about the film as well is not just the storyline, which is just a lovely storyline of love of this young couple, this American, June, who actually sounds incredibly British. I actually thought she was British.
I do too. That's the first thing I said to you. I don't buy her as an American, but apparently she grew up in Miami.
Yeah, I just thought she was a British actress who just couldn't master an American accent. No, she was an American who couldn't master an American accent. But I mean, it's the love of these two people who, if it wasn't for him being a pilot and them chatting, him in theory in his last moments of life before he threw himself out of the plane, to die rather than burning in the plane. You know, this relationship, and obviously Conductor 71, the French conductor who conducts the dead up to the other world. You know, this love affair is the most important thing. So it actually, it just shows there are no boundaries between religions, color, creed, nationality. These two people have never met, they've only spoken, and they kind of develop this attachment in his theory, last dying moments of life. And obviously that is then rekindled when he survives, when Conductor 71 misses him in the pea soup, the fog over the English Channel as he bails out. So this use of color and black and white, which is used through the film, is amazing. And the conductor, when he comes down from heaven, this other world, this other place, he brings up this lovely line when he comes from the rose. He said, "We are so starved of color up there." It's just such a lovely throwaway line as it comes away from this rose, this beautiful rose. The color is just, I'm just in awe of the color. Again, I just love the color of these films of this era. There's a softness about it. There's a real texture about it, which you don't get in modern films. So I love the film because I love the storyline. I love the fight against prejudice. And I love the color. Actually, if you can think about prejudice as the black and the white, the yin and the yang, it could also be that as well. I don't know. Or maybe I'm just overly thinking this film.
Yeah, you actually had in redone HD DVD of it. I watched it on a YouTube, which wasn't as good, but I can imagine I might end up borrowing it from the library just so I can see what the digitally remastered, new HD would look like. Another thing I found interesting when I was reading a little bit of the trivia is that the staircase, it was like this huge, massive thing, and with like a really loud motor. So they had to actually dub in the dialogue on the staircase because the motor was so loud.
What about him? Lincoln. No, it's hardly fair to drag him in. I don't believe he'd be prejudiced.
The hugeness of that scene of the trial with people, like a huge cast of, making up actually real, real nurses from the Red Cross and real service. They actually had real people. And they said that the people that earned the money, they gave it to like the charity of the Red Cross or something like that.
That's fairly typical because the recording process in those days meant that they would have to dub things anyway quite often. The recording, look, there were microphones on booms. Today we have tiny little mics which you can hide, if I had any, you can hide in your hair and you can hide in clothing and it doesn't rustle. So today, sound recording is so much more sophisticated. Mm-hmm. In those days, those microphones were very cumbersome. The camera to record this was huge. The blimp, the sound blimp, was immense. It was like, I don't know, like a meter by 3/4 of a meter, so a yard by 2.5 foot or something, just to deaden the sound of the camera. So that technology was very, very crude 75 years ago in comparison to today. So actually having to dub the dialogue on the staircase, I don't see as being particularly unusual. You would today, if your concept of the film industry or of television was of today's technology. In those days, I think it was fairly common to have to redub. It's quite common on location as well to have to redub because of extraneous noise you cannot get rid of. So, but that was a massive set. That was a massive set to create that illusion of this never-ending staircase. Some amazing pieces of technological innovation within this film as well. You're talking about the scene in the trial. That's probably what I think would have been a match shot. So what you have is you have a group of people and everything. So you've got a lot of people who can walk around and create movement. And then everything around that is painted on glass, right? And then it's filmed through that. So it saves you making a huge set. That's a very simple way. You then have something, or had something, called traveling mats, which was the similar kind of thing where the camera would move, much more sophisticated. But in those days, rather than building a huge set, you would use a mat shot. So basically, the image was painted on glass, you'd film through it, you'd leave the piece where the live action would take place. But that jury sequence, when it pulls back and pulls back and pulls back and pulls back, it just ends up as a galaxy. What a lovely thought! This trial is a galaxy. It's just like what a lovely concept.
The court will adjourn.
And it starts out, the whole movie starts out in the galaxy with a narrator, and then kind of like zooms into when you finally are at the Earth, and you are on that, like, is it May 2nd or something, that there's the battle, and all the bombers are coming back from Germany, and they're hitting that fog. So it starts off with that, and then it zooms out to that galaxy.
It's a Wonderful Life starts the film in a very similar way. Same age, give or take, a few months, a film of the same age. So they've both taken this concept of looking at Earth from outside of Earth, from beyond Earth, looking at the solar system, the stars, and then zooming into Earth to find the protagonist of the film. So it's an idea which was used within the two films we've talked. Well, one of the films we've talked about, It's a Wonderful Life, and this film. Mm-hmm. So obviously, I think at this particular point, the idea had kind of got in there that, you can look at Earth from a distance. Mm-hmm. And I believe I did read somewhere that Arthur C. Clarke was involved in.
Yeah, I read that too.
Talk to about this whole concept. So, a lovely idea. When I sort of really kind of clocked that the first time many years ago, I just thought, what a beautiful idea. What a beautiful idea. Visually stunning. Because we're all wondering what's beyond Earth. Yes, we can go to the moon. We've been to the moon. Yes, we have probes going out there. But what is beyond there? Is it a court case? It's like, the solar system, Voyager 1 hasn't quite got there yet. But when Voyager 1 gets there, is Voyager 1 going to find a court case going on?
And, some humorous things is that, the American soldiers, when they arrive in this other world, this heaven or other world, that they only mention the word, like one soldier says, is this heaven? But what they find a Coca-Cola machine and start grabbing Coca-Colas. Which was like kind of like humorous. And then when they get the wings are wrapped like as if you would get your clothes from the dry cleaners.
Yeah. I mean, the other thing about when the Americans turn up, they're very brash. The Americans are very brash, but it's lovely when they're signing in, and the captain or whatever he is like, "Where's the officers' quarters?" And the clerk says, "We're all equal up here."
Officers' quarters, of course.
We're all the same up here, Captain.
Excuse me, brother.
I caught that. Yeah, where's the that was a good line.
The next replier just kind of slightly pushes him away. Out of the way, buddy, and signs in like there is no hierarchy anymore. Again, it's one of those little tiny subplots, that little line which is just thrown in, which is about, I suppose, equality and prejudice. Which is, they're not pushed in your face within the film. They're just subtle little things which are put in, and you suddenly go, yeah. So the brash American, and again, that brash American thing comes across in the trial with the radio being turned on. For Britain, it's the cricket. And when the radio's turned on for America, it's this music which just nobody gets. It's the latest kind of music, and it's just like...
Yeah, and even the American No, the British person, the British counsel, which was the doctor, he's like, I don't understand a word of it either. Counsel for, or the prosecutor, like, I don't get it either. Like, same thing now, like, we don't understand this new music on the radio. It was this music that was probably this 1940s, like, you know, like dance music. And they're like, I don't understand a word of that.
No, I mean, I think, you know, because it was coming out of a period of time when the world was rapidly changing. I mean, rapidly changing. From the beginning of the war to the end of the war, the world had changed. The world had radically changed, and music had radically changed, and communication and everything else had radically changed. But yeah, again, I think because there's a certain amount of stereotyping happening there, which I suppose, again, is part of this prejudice. We stereotype the Americans for being loud, brash. I think at that particular point, you know, the Americans were seen as over here, overpaid, and oversexed, I think was the expression of the day. And somewhat, I think, resented, because Britain at that particular point was a country which had been very heavily bombed, had suffered as a result of that, and the Americans hadn't. And maybe there's some resentment. And I think the film it also deals a little bit potentially with the resentment between Britain and America, or American and Britain, and the change in the power between the UK and the US. Prior to that, Britain had been the dominant power in the world in terms of colonies, in terms of her influence, and that had changed. That had just turned itself on its head, and America was now the top dog. So, you know, there's that to look at within one of these little bullet points, within these little pieces of information, which is only just thrown in, but not laboured within the film.
I did read something that it was almost like there was some idea that it was almost like this idea of like, let's have this love story between this British soldier and this American to kind of like bridge that rift that was like, that you talk about.
Yeah. Well, I mean, obviously, during the war, it had been the other way around, because obviously there were so many Americans in the UK that a lot of people had met, and a lot went back to the States. A lot of British women went back to the States with their American husbands, or with their foreign partners, you know, who they'd met in Europe after the war, you know, at the end of the war, after the war. That sort of thing was happening, where GIs and British service personnel and the Canadians and everybody else were meeting up with these young women from other countries and bringing them back to their own country. So there's a bit absolutely that is happening within that period of time, that actually happened within that period of time. But you're right, this bridging of the gap between Britain and America, almost a reverse of really what would have been happening. So the Americans would have been taking British girls back to the States, would have been marrying British girls, having relationships with British girls. This kind of flips the coin slightly, in that this American girl falls in love with a British pilot.
Yeah. One line that that stood out to me that I wrote down somewhere here is that, like, I think for all of our English learners that are learning English, like, I like this one line that Peter says. He says, she has a foreign accent. It's sweet, sounds sweet to me.
Even though it sounds very English.
Even though it sounds British. But I mean, like, I like that line. Like, yeah, she does sound British. But I find so many of our English learners are like, oh, how can I sound like a native speaker? And that, you know what, the foreign accent sounded sweet to him.
I've got to agree. I mean, like you, I get a lot of people saying, how do I acquire a British accent? First of all, what British accent do you want? But you're right. I mean, my wife is Japanese. She can't say hippopotamus. She says hippopotamus. And I wouldn't want her to say any other way. Kitchen initially was chicken. She couldn't differentiate between the two words. She really couldn't get her vocals around kitchen and chicken. And it's just like, they are some of the sweetest points when you're speaking to somebody who doesn't speak English as a first language. It's these little words, it's these little things they can't master and grasp. And we know this with Spanish. We know the inability to get our mouth around some of these words. And the fun thing is when you listen to somebody, and I've had that said to me when I speak in Spanish, I love the way you speak Spanish. I love the fact you have this strange accent. And you're right, it's interesting, it's sexy, it's endearing, and I just think it's lovely to have a great quality of English if you're not a native English speaker. But actually, do you know what? You will and you have to retain your own personality, because it's part of your personality, and I think that has to come across when you're speaking. But yeah, that's a lovely line. Her accent sounds sweet to me. Yeah, absolutely. I'd go with that. Thumbs up on that one. Thumbs up on that one.
Yeah,
Certainly.
absolutely. Thank you so much for like suggesting this, because it's something I wouldn't have watched otherwise. I do like a number of old movies, but that was one that I never really thought of watching. And I actually enjoyed it. I watched it a few times just to like, be ready for our conversation, but it's something that I probably wouldn't have watched otherwise.
Thank you. No, I appreciate that, because I think a lot of old films have just been consigned to the dustbin and really aren't looked at. But actually, for me, I just, like I said, the color is beautiful. The storyline is beautiful. It's again, I go back to some of the other films we've talked about. The shots are very slow, very simple, beautifully put together. I mean, some beautiful framing, but you can concentrate on the dialogue without being too swamped by the cutting process and the fast action and special effects and CGI. It's a simple film to follow. It's a simple story, despite the fact it does have these little layers and these little things thrown in. You can watch the film and not really need to understand them. So I think dialogue-wise, yes, you're going to miss a couple of bits and pieces. The use of the word, there's a few technical pieces of word which would have been quite common in the day, which you're never going to get. But I think you can probably watch that film and get over these little pieces of dialogue which you don't quite understand. And how language has changed. The word "gay" is used to mean happy, which is the original version. And it's in there, and you kind of go, you listen to it now and you think, oh yeah, how language develops and changes, how words take on new meanings, shift their meaning. So yeah, no, absolutely. Super happy that you enjoyed the film, and I hope everybody else enjoys this film as well, because it's simple, dialogue's clear, I think, for the most part. And something which was said on another forum, on a WhatsApp group, was they find a lot of modern films difficult because of the content, them being Muslim. And this film, I think you can almost, it sits, families can watch it, children can watch it. And I think even if your religion kind of has different perspectives on things, there's nothing massively difficult about the film, which means that it excludes certain groups in various societies, in various countries. It's kind of, I hope, fairly universal, because there's nothing how do you put it? There's nothing in it which is difficult. I think there's nothing which would exclude you as a family watching it, or as somebody with a different perspective as to your moral sort of code. I think hopefully this is the kind of film which will sit happily with a lot of people from a lot of different countries.
I agree. I think part where they never really called it heaven. There's one mention of the soldier saying, "This is heaven, isn't it?" And one other mention of like heavenly, but it's mostly referred to as the other world. So I think kind of getting away from any sort of religion aspect of it. It's just another world.
Yes, another world. Yeah.
But what do you want now?
You, my friend.
What for?
To conduct you.
Where to?
To the training center.
Training for what?
For another world.
Yeah, absolutely. It's the kind of, I mean, you mentioned the fact, the other world. And I think, again, that kind of comes back to this mental conflict, this situation we have with Peter, his brain injury, his fight within himself about why he should be dead but isn't dead. You're right. I mean, I think there is only one reference that I remember about heaven, and then they look at him like, when he makes this reference. So yeah, it is this heaven as we kind of perceive it, or is this his mental state? You're right. There are certain ambiguities about what this other world
is, right?
Yeah.
So I think it's a great way to spend an hour and 46 minutes for sure.
Fingers crossed everybody who watches it does enjoy it.
Yes. Thank you so much again.
No, thank you. Much appreciated. Take care.
All right.